You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Media Opinions. Been a minute since I've done a Media Opinions, but I figured it was about time I got down to doing another one. So recently I've done a few streams of Oblivion Remastered, and it's a perfectly serviceable way to play Oblivion, although I've got my own gripes with it, which we'll talk about a little here, because this will also be kind of a review of that. But more broadly, I wanted to discuss game remakes, remasters, re-releases, and things like that. Obviously, we're in an age where there's a lot of game remakes like that. There's ones that are just straight-up remasters, where it's just the graphics done over the original gameplay as, like, a new shell. For instance, things like Halo, the Master Chief Collection, has, Halo 1 and 2 like that, and then Halo 1 also had Anniversary on the 360 prior to that, which, was later tweaked for MCC. With those, I think that's a perfectly fine way to do it. I love MCC. It's a really convenient way to play most of the Halo games. In fact, all the ones that I really care to play. With Halo 1 Anniversary, I do have some gripes, like the fact that it just reuses a bunch of Reach graphics for the most part. And, it is a little bit janky in a few areas. Halo 2 Anniversary, I think, looks a hell of a lot better. Halo 1 Anniversary also completely ruins the atmosphere of 343 Guilty Spark, which is one problem I see a lot with remasters. Is when there's, like, horror-themed areas and stuff in non-horror games, a lot of the time the atmosphere just feels kind of ruined. For instance, I remember being really disappointed in Oblivion Remastered when I got to the Lighthouse in the Dark Brotherhood questline, because that's, like, one of the most iconic parts of the game to me. It just seemed less gory, less atmospheric, it was more well-lit by, like, a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there, like, a creepy sound effect, like a low-pitched hum in the original version that just didn't seem to be there in the remake? Maybe I'm wrong on that last detail, but I seem to recall that. Regardless, it's much more well-lit, and the gore is much more subtle, and honestly, like the flayed Lucy and LeChance as well, while it's technically more graphically sound, just seems less brutal in the remake than it did in the original. But, in addition to remakes, in addition to remasters, there's also remakes, because the Oblivion one is kind of this weird in-between where they tweaked the leveling system, they added in sprinting, and tweaked a couple other gameplay mechanics, but largely the gameplay is left unchanged. But there's games like, Conquer, Live and Reloaded, which, by the way, underrated as hell game. I've got my own gripes with it, obviously, like I do prefer Bad Fur Day. But Live and Reloaded is still a perfectly cromulent way to play the game. And I think it's worth playing even if you have played Bad Fur Day, because they're different enough to both deserve to exist. That said, like I said, aesthetically, there are a lot of things I don't like. However, the last third of the game, Spooky, War, and Heist, all are just better in Live and Reloaded. Then, of course, there's things like the Insane trilogy from Crash Bandicoot, which I haven't played, so I'm not really going to comment on. But there's also the Spyro Reignited trilogy, which again is fine, and there are some things that are better in it. However, I do have my problems with the aesthetic, because one of the problems I see with a lot of, either newer entries in older franchises like that, particularly with platformers, or with remakes of them, they make everything really, sharp-edged and angular, instead of having anything be round, and that's one of the problems I have with Spyro Reignited. Again, it's a fine game, but there are some aesthetic problems I have with it, and, there is some jank to it that wasn't in the original, and they did remove some of the jank from the original, for both better and worse, because some of it was fun. Hitboxes, gliding, things like that aren't as consistent in the Reignited trilogy as they were in the original. Again, it is a good re-release, it is a good remaster to an extent, but I do have my problems with it, although I should probably get back to streaming it at some point. And of course, there's really, really half-assed remasters where they basically just upscale the game, slap it on a disc, and put it on the next generation of consoles. There's a lot of these that I actually do like that a lot of people have problems with. For instance, Silent Hill 2 HD on the 360. I know that it is inferior with, the fog, and, some of the stuff doesn't look quite right, and things like that. Having never played the original, I still found that to be a pretty serviceable way to play the game. I still had a lot of fun playing it. It was my first time playing through Silent Hill 2. So, taking that into account, knowing that, there are many aspects that make it inferior to the original, nevertheless, it was still a perfectly fine way for me to play the game. I quite enjoyed it. Or then there's things like Dragon Ball Z Budokai HD Collection, which I know that, they replaced all the music because there was, some issues with, plagiarism or something with the original soundtrack. Nevertheless, the soundtrack they used a lot of music from Tenkaichi 2, which had a really kick-ass soundtrack, so it still has a really good soundtrack. Well, there was the Call of Duty port on 360 that only ported the campaign for Call of Duty 1 that was called Call of Duty Classic. That was my first way to play through Call of Duty 1 as well. So I guess what I'm saying is it does range in scale in how good these remakes, remasters, and re-releases are. I do think that they have a purpose, but I do think we have an over-reliance on them. For instance, when they say, oh, there's rumors of a Fallout 3 remake, I don't want that. I do have my own problems with the Oblivion remake. For instance, aesthetically, I don't like the way a lot of the characters' faces look. Like, I know that the faces in Oblivion were, like, kind of derpy, but that was iconic about it. There's a lot less color in the remake, so a lot of things don't seem as, like, whimsical to me. Like, there are things that still work, and there's a lot of good lighting in the remake. But the problem I have is that, again, it just doesn't look quite as magical. It's not as iconic. Because I think one of the problems we have in today's day and age is everything's focused on hyper-realism, as opposed to, having things be aesthetically pleasing. I think we've reached a point where, like, for instance, I think the perfect aesthetic for, like, an RPG is, Oblivion Original, Fallout 3, and Fallout New Vegas. Those all look great. And then, you had Skyrim, which I think, worked for Skyrim, but then they had that kind of similar aesthetic in Fallout 4, and I hated it. So that's one of my things I worry about with the potential of a Fallout 3 remake, is that it'll make everything look like Fallout 4. And I really hope they wouldn't tweak the level system to be anything like Fallout 4, because I really fucking hate the Fallout 4 level system. But yeah, I really hope that they don't make Fallout 3 anything like Fallout 4 if they do a remake. I really don't see any purpose of a remake. Like, the ones I would want remade would be things like Daggerfall or Fallout 1 and 2. Like, all the ones that are already good, I don't want to remake, but the ones that I like in concept but don't really like the gameplay of, those are the ones I'd want to see a remake of. One of my problems that I have with the aesthetic, though, like I said, is the character designs. They're all really, like, hyper-realistic, but they're, like, fucking gelatinous. Like, it seems almost too real to be real. Like, there's a reason the term hyper-realism exists. But, like, it looks like they're, like, have, like, a fucking fake skin over them. Like, it doesn't seem real. Seems kind of uncanny and weird to me. And it seems almost AI-like. I know I've brought this up before, but there's just a lot of things I hate about the aesthetic. Also, side note, there was the fucking fact that they replaced male and female with Type 1 and Type 2, and then people fucking chimped out about Nexus mods having a mod to change that back. So it's like a whole big thing. It's a fucking problem with games in general now. But there is a lot of little issues and things that I have with it. Again, it's a perfectly fine way to play Oblivion. There are some things that are cool about it. But all these people acting like it's superior to the original are fucking crazy to me. So, game remakes have their place, but largely I think we're over-dependent on them, and a lot of the times there can be problems.